Hi, my name's Susanna Fitzgerald. I've been an author for many years and I've written many books. I've even published one. But one thing I really miss about writing books is the instant reaction you get from telling a live story. And that's something I want to change now. And I've got the perfect book to do it on. It's called Curse of the Double Six. It's a high-flying action-adventure romantic comedy with a little bit of an Old West ghost story thrown in for good measure. I think it's a great story, but here's the thing. I wrote it in 15 days and it's a little rough. So I've been reading it out loud to my family and recording it. And the recording is just a little bit rough. It's recorded on my old home computer, which means there's sounds of fans humming and people eating snack food and laughing loudly at my very funny story. And if you can forgive all of that, I would love for you to be a part of this journey. Tell me what you think of the story in the comments below. Any and all criticisms are more than welcome. This is Susanna Fitzgerald for Bards Anonymous, asking for all readers and listeners with a high sense of adventure and a good imagination. Curse of the Double Six by Susanna Fitzgerald. This one's for family, friends, and lifelong influences, but it's especially for my daddy and my sister, Leah Joy. If you hadn't played Farkle with me on a gray Thursday afternoon, there never would have been a curse. And for my mama, who inspired, well, you'll see. A hero may be lost for a time, but never truly forgotten. Chapter 1. The year was 1889. The place was Clark's, Texas. Wait 1 minute. Now what? That's here. So everybody knows you can't have a story where you live. Says who? Everybody. Have you heard the mayor say that? Well, no. How about your mother? She's the mayor. Then if everybody says it and your mother doesn't, then your mother must be nobody. She is not! Then do you want your story or not? Terence O'Connor, Clarkson VI, future 8th generation cattleman and 7th generation leader of Clark's, Texas, folded his chubby 6-year-old arms over his already stocky chest and leveled a suspicious frown at his babysitter. Risa Maytree, born of far more dubious parentage and facing a rather uncertain future, arched her superior 17-year-old eyebrows at her richest client. Okay, Terry gave in. Tell me the story. Risa suppressed an urge to sigh in relief and began again. The year was 1889. The place was Clark's, Texas, on the ground floor of the Snake Eyes Saloon. Terry's adorable blue eyes grew bigger than silver dollars. A saloon? He asked in what he fondly imagined was a whisper. He swiveled his tow-blonde head back and forth to check for his mother, then leaned closer to Brisa. A real saloon? Yep. Brisa nodded enthusiastically, sending her bob-cut brown hair flapping wildly. She bent down until her nose almost touched Terry's and continued in a conspirator's voice. A real saloon with bat-wing doors to the outside and cowboys in hats and boots and girls with lacy dresses. Terry swallowed and leaned closer, forgetting for a moment that all females carried evil germs. And did they have? He lost his nerve. Brisa bent closer and her mysterious voice whispered the forbidden word directly into Terry's ear. Liquor. Terry gasped and clapped both of his hands over his mouth. Brisa leaned back against the wall and examined her fingernails. Yep, big, tall bottles of... She glanced around and then winked. 20 bottles? Terry demanded. Brisa clicked her tongue. Oh, please. Back in the day, the Snake Eyes was the finest saloon east of San Antonio. They probably had at least 30 bottles and maybe a few more under the bar just in case they ran out. Terry, who just learned to count higher than his fingers and toes, squirmed with the wicked delight only the child of a Southern Baptist could truly experience. Sitting at a corner table were 2 men, Brisa continued. One was a cowhand, a real rough sort. He'd cleaned up for the evening, got a shave and a haircut across the street at the barber's, and he'd even shined his boots. Terry nodded in solemn sympathy. Bet his mother made him wear a bow tie, he commented. Brisa quickly shut out the image of a rough-and-tumble saloon-frequenting cowboy being manhandled into a bow tie by Terry's hairspray-lacquered mother and hurried on with her much-interrupted tale. Gambling with the cowboy was a man wearing fancier clothes than anyone in Clark's had ever seen before, and a fancy accent, an English one. He made everyone call him Lord Charles, and his shirt was so starched he couldn't lean back in his chair. Brisa gently shifted up higher on the bed, subtly urging Terry towards the pillow. Sam and Lord Charles were dicing. Terry grinned wickedly and got under the covers, and Lord Charles kept losing. Why? Terry demanded. Because Lord Charles kept throwing a winning hand, except Brisa, who had no idea how games of chance worked, but did know how to remember a good story, stuck one finger up in the air before Terry could outsmart her again. 2 of the dice kept turning up with 6s. She could see the question coming and hurried on without drawing breath, and that spoiled the pattern. Sam kept getting richer and richer, and Lord Charles was getting really, really angry. Finally, he accused Sam of using rigged dice, and the next thing anyone knew, the men had drawn their pistols on each other. They shot each other? Terry demanded. Not quite, Brisa said. You see, the dice were rigged. Sam was working with the saloon owner, Vince, to swindle yahoos. Terry, who saw no great sin in swindling a yahoo, shrugged. So when Lord Charles figured it out and pulled his gun, Vince, who was behind the bar, Brisa saw she was in imminent danger of losing Terry's attention and leaned in, pouring the stuff. Terry's eyes went wide with glee. He was actually touching? He looked from side to side. The bottles? Drinking out of them too, I'd wager, Brisa said in satisfaction. But when he saw his partner get in trouble, he dropped a bottle right there on the saloon floor and grabbed his own gun. Terry, trying to recreate the scene, frowned. Lord Charles must have been a real dummy, he decided. Didn't he notice? Lord Charles was English. Of course he was a dummy, Brisa retorted dismissively. And no, he didn't notice, because Vince was standing behind him. It took a moment, but then Terry's inherent Texan honor kicked in and he sat bolt upright, his mouth agape. He didn't shoot him in the back! Yes, he did. How could he do that? Terry all but cried. No Texan should ever shoot a guy in the back, not even a dummy English yahoo. You are absolutely right, Terry. Brisa smiled and gently pressed him back. But the truth is, people do things they shouldn't all the time. Like when your no-good daddy knocked up your cheapest trash mama and skipped town? Terry asked eagerly. Brisa narrowed her eyes at him. Sorry, Terry muttered and crossed his arms again. Something like that idea, she finally relented. Or like when the cheapest trash babysitter tells a nice Baptist boy about the wonders of a saloon. She shook her head. Oh dear, what am I doing? She reached over for a book of illustrated Bible stories. Maybe I should... No! Terry yelled. He sat straight up and grabbed her hand, gazing at her with the pleading perfection that only a 6-year-old male was capable of. Please, Brisa, please finish your story. She looked thoughtfully at the book, then shook her head. Oh, well, I'm probably already bound for the H.G. Double Toothpicks Ranch anyway. Terry grinned, displaying his missing front teeth. Where was I? The no-good bartender dropped a bottle of the stuff and shot the dummy English yahoo in the back. Ah, just so. Brisa nodded sagely. And so Lord Charles was struck. She twisted around with all the dubious grace she had learned by avoiding Rodney Mayer's groping hands in English class, and pointed somewhere towards the middle of her back. Right there, with a .45. Terry grinned wolfishly. But Brisa stuck up the all-important finger of authority a second time. That wasn't the worst of it. She leaned over and poked Terry in the middle of his stomach. The bullet came out, right there. Terry leaned over to gape at his stomach, which grinned stupidly back at him, courtesy of his Scooby-Doo pajamas. Yuck! He whispered in horror-struck glee. Yuck is right, Brisa said. Do you know what they called that in the Old West? Terry shook his head. Gut shot. Brisa pronounced the crude words with a great deal of satisfaction. Cracks about cheap, no-good parents that had undoubtedly originated from expensive, better-than-everybody parents still stinging. So there Lord Charles lay, choking on his own blood, trying to put his guts back inside his torn belly. Terry positively shook with glee, and as he lay dying, he reached over with his perfectly manicured English fingers and touched the dice which had landed in his blood, and you know what? No, what? Terry asked. They'd landed 6s up. Terry gasped. So the gut-shot Lord Charles whispered, for everybody in the saloon to hear, "Cursed you are, cursed cowards, cursed by the double six." Terry stared wide-eyed. Fortunately, he was also laying back in his bed, still and content. "What was the curse of the double six?" he asked. Brisa shrugged. "No one knew," she said. "Lord Charles couldn't keep his guts together, and he died right there on the floor before he finished the curse." "Figures." Roast. "Everybody figured that it had something to do with Sam and Vince," Brisa allowed. "What did they do about it?" Terry asked. "Nothing," Brisa answered. "Everyone knew Sam and Vince were cheats and tended to kill people. Unlucky Lord Charles probably wasn't the first dying man to curse them." Terry frowned, dissatisfied. "But," Brisa raised her finger of authority, and Terry gave her his gap-toothed grin, "the other dead men hadn't knocked double sixes to the ground and then covered the dice with their own blood, and other men weren't laying on the floor of the Snake Eyes saloon." Brisa stood up. "At first, no one noticed the bad luck. They all figured the shooting and dying was just a product of the Old West, you know." She gently shifted the pillow under Terry's head to his favorite spot. "But then Vince went to shoot another man in the back." "No good son of a biscuit eater," Terry decided. "Just so. But before he could shoot this man, a diamondback rattlesnake bit him." Terry gaped. "And not on the boot like any sensible rattler would, but on the hand, because somehow that snake had got up on the bar amidst all of the bottles, and it bit Vince right on his gun hand." Terry grinned, happy about Vince's bad luck. "So Vince missed the man he was aiming for and shot Sam high in his left shoulder." "What happened then?" Terry demanded. "Well, Vince grabbed a knife and chopped the head off that rattler, its fangs still in his gun hand. And the guy they'd been cheating grabbed all his money and ran out. And it would have all blown over if one of the ladies in the saloon had noticed the pattern on the rattler." Terry waited, unable to speak. "It had a diamond pattern down its back, 6 of them. Then it had a strange band like most rattlers don't have, and then 6 more diamonds." Brisa smiled to herself as she moved the bookmark to a new place in the illustrated stories and waited. "Oh!" Terry gasped. "The double six!" "Mm-hmm," Brisa nodded. "Vince's hand swelled up until it was bigger than his head, and the doc had to—" She made an exaggerated chopping motion. Terry was gratifyingly shocked, but then he nodded. "Good, then he couldn't shoot people in the back anymore." "Just so," she replied. "And neither could Sam, because the doc couldn't get the bullet out of his arm, and it paralyzed his whole shoulder and arm, so he couldn't ride or work anymore." Terry was deeply pleased. "So Vince kept working the saloon, only he got poorer and poorer because he couldn't cheat, and he wasn't a good businessman on his own. And they say Sam married a rich old widow who owned a ranch just outside of town." "Why would any rich woman want to marry a guy like Sam?" Terry demanded. "His arm was busted." "Well, the woman was kind of a curse of her own," Brisa said, quietly thinking unkind thoughts about a certain mare. "She had already buried 3 husbands and shot 2 ranch hands, and she had a voice like a shrieking eagle." Terry let out a demonstrative shriek that could have peeled paint. With the mature air of a 17-year-old babysitter, Brisa outlasted the screaming and nodded. "Just so." Terry curled up on his side, for once looking like a child, and blinked at his babysitter. "What happened after that?" he asked. "Oh, Sam and Vince lived horribly miserable lives, teased and ridiculed for everyone for being cripples, and back shooters, and no good sons of biscuit eaters. Then they died, alone and miserable. The Snake Eyes saloon changed donors, but every time anyone ever rolled a double six, someone died. At first it was shooting, stabbings, things like that. But eventually the modern world caught up with Clark's, Texas, and the sheriff started getting a bit stern about them shenanigans. So the dying happened in weirder ways. Men fell through floors, women choked on apples, once a dog scared a cat and gave a man who was all of 20 years old a heart attack." Terry frowned. "So eventually they had to close the saloon, and it moldered away because everyone was too afraid to tear it down." "So it's still there?" "Yep, right down on—" Brisa frowned, trying to remember. Terry groaned. "Girls are useless at directions." "That is a vulgar and cruel generalization of a stereotype." There was a long silence, and Brisa smiled. "But in my case, it's true." She leaned against the doorframe.
Do you remember where the little diner with the red curtains is? Terry scowled. The waitress pinched my cheek and said I was cute. Brisa snorted through her nose, then caught herself. Well, the old Snake Eyes Saloon with the double six curse is right down the side street from there. It's only heaps of old wood and a bit of frame left. Terry's eyes went wide. I've seen it. Brisa nodded. So you see, stories can happen where you live. Brisa flipped the light switch off, then stuck her head back in. You want the door open or closed? Closed, Terry muttered sleepily. I'm not a baby. But before the latch clicked, he called out. Brisa opened the door and stuck her head back in, desperately hoping for no glass of water. Yes. Maybe just a little bit open? Of course. Brisa? Yes. Why didn't they just stop playing with dice at the Snake Eyes Saloon? Because no unnaturally intelligent Clarkson boys went to the saloon. Brisa quickly crossed her fingers. Why not? Because the Clarksons are Baptists, Brisa replied solemnly. Clarksons are boring, Terry complained. Not as much as you think. Are the Maitreys Baptists? Brisa pressed her forehead tight against the partially open door. No, Terry. Why not? Because the Maitreys don't go to church. Why not? Because the Baptist preacher told my mother that she'd picked out a no-good tramp over any decent man and she gave him a black eye. Brisa? Yes. Why aren't you a Methodist then? There's a Methodist church right next to our Baptist church. Because the Methodist preacher called my mama a cheap as trash lady and my Uncle Maynard beat him up. My mom says that your Uncle Maynard is crazy and ought to be in prison. Then she should try putting the handcuffs on him herself. What about the Lutherans? The youth pastor wouldn't ever let me play with the other children. The Presbyterians? My grandfather's a Presbyterian. He won't speak to my mama, so we can't go there. How about Terence O'Connor Clarkson VI? You promised me on your sacred Texan Clarkson Baptist honor that you would go right to sleep like a good boy if I told you one story that wasn't in the Bible book. Now, are you trying to cheat and get the story of how Mom and I were thrown out of every church in Clark's? No. Good, because if I thought you were cheating, I could never tell you any stories ever again. Ever. Oh. The door creaked halfway closed. Brisa? Yes? Good night. Good night, Terry.